Hey guys, tonight we're starting somewhere damp. Not metaphorically damp, literally. Picture this. You're ankle deep in squelching mud, your tunic smells like turnips and sheep, and your best flirtation tool is eye contact over a shared bucket of pig slop. Welcome to medieval peasant romance, where meet cuties involve manure and courtship unfolds between chores. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, not because of heartbreak, but because tetanus wasn't invented yet and that pitchfork looks suspiciously infected. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is, because nothing says romance like global time zones and late-night curiosity. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a slushy patch of earth behind the smithy, holding a bucket that leaks slightly. The pigs are rooting at your feet. Someone, maybe you, maybe not, just let out a very unromantic belch. Across the muck, you see her, Gisela, daughter of the cooper. She's got hay in her hair and a smudge of soot across one cheek. Somehow, this is the most radiant she's ever looked. You both look away quickly, because this is 1347, and flirting is a high-risk activity, like threshing grain with your eyes closed or trying to explain irony to a monk. You bump into her again a few days later at the village well. She's drawing water with a wooden bucket so ancient it deserves a pension. You're there pretending your family needs more water, but in truth, you just hope she's on the same chore rotation. You offer to carry her bucket. She raises an eyebrow, possibly suspicious, but hands it over. Mainstream historical fact? Most medieval peasants lived in tight-knit communities where marriages were local and largely driven by proximity, survival, and shared labor. You fell in love with who you saw at dawn feeding chickens. Quirky tidbit? Some villagers believed a shared dream meant fate had paired you. Of course, this could be awkward if you dreamed of, say, your neighbor's wife or a cow that whispered poetry. You talk, a little, about rain, about barley, about old Moritz's donkey that bit the reeve again. She laughs. You laugh. It's shockingly tender. Then her brother appears. He's taller than you. His eyebrows say, "I will end you." You hand over the bucket and flee. But in your heart, it's official. You're smitten. The next days are a blur of strategic loitering. You start lingering near the spinning house, offering entirely unnecessary help. You bring over eggs that didn't need delivering. You compliment her dog, even though it clearly hates you. She notices. Historians still argue whether peasant love stories were real love, or just practical alliances to share bread and fend off wolves. But in that moment, you don't care. Her laugh cuts through the fog like sunlight through smoke. It feels like poetry, bad poetry, but poetry nonetheless. You finally find her alone behind the barn, picking burrs from a cloak. She glances up, surprised. You freeze. Then you stammer something about how pretty the sky looks, even though it's gray and vaguely menacing. She doesn't laugh. She just says, "It smells like it'll rain. Walk me home." You do. Your hands brush once, then again. Then you're both blushing like you've been slapped with turnip wine. And as the first fat raindrops fall, you think maybe, just maybe, this is the start of something dangerously close to love. The next morning, you're up before the rooster. Not because you're diligent, because your brain spent the entire night reenacting yesterday's handbrush moment like it was some kind of epic ballad. Over and over, with commentary, and probably a lute solo. You drag yourself to morning mass, yawning into your sleeve. Everyone's here because in your village, Sunday is the only time people get dressed up and sit in a building with stone walls. You shuffle into your usual pew and there she is, Gisela, 3 rows ahead. A single braid hanging down her back like a challenge. Church is, unexpectedly, a medieval singles mixer. Eye contact is currency. A smirk during the "peace be with you"? Basically a proposal. You spend the next hour pretending to listen to Father Gregory's sermon while playing the ancient game of, did she look back? Or was that just a yawn? Eventually, she turns. Just for a second. One quick glance over her shoulder. It's not much, but in 14th century romance terms, that's practically scandalous. Mainstream historical fact, for many medieval villagers, Church services were one of the few communal gatherings where men and women could interact semi-freely. It was both a spiritual obligation and a subtle social dance floor. Quirky tidbit. Some peasants passed love notes on folded slivers of parchment or inscribed initials into wax, both deeply frowned upon, unless you were very discreet or the priest was very nearsighted. Father Gregory coughs from the pulpit. Loudly, suspiciously. Maybe he saw the glance. Maybe he just needs a lozenge. Either way, you drop your gaze to the floor like it's suddenly covered in holy secrets. After Mass, everyone mills about in the muddy square outside. The gossips chatter near the bake oven. Kids chase each other around the fountain. And you, ever so casually, hover near the cooper's cart. Gisela walks out with her mother. She sees you. Her eyes widen just slightly, but she doesn't shy away. That counts as encouragement. You wave, sort of. It's more of a twitch. She smiles, but her mother catches it and frowns so hard it could sour milk. You retreat. Historians still argue whether the medieval church was more a suppressor or supporter of peasant matchmaking. On one hand, it enforced rigid marriage laws. On the other, it was the only place you could see your crush outside of pig duty. You spend the next week inventing reasons to walk past the cooper's hut. You admire their wool rims. You comment on timber grain like it's a rare art form. You even offer unsolicited praise for their goose, who responds by biting your shin. One afternoon, while pretending to inspect a mysterious pile of hay across the road, you catch Gisela sneaking a flower into her satchel. A single wild violet. She looks up and sees you seeing her. There's a pause. Then she tosses the flower in your direction. Not at you, just near enough that you have to pick it up. So you do. And when you look back, she's already gone, vanishing into the alley like a silk ribbon in the wind. You keep the flower. You press it between pages of the one book your family owns, the Calendar of Saints. It's now blessed. Probably. Later, you hear that Gisela's father has been asking around about potential suitors. Your heart drops somewhere near your knees. You don't own land. You have no dowry. Your most valuable possession is currently the violet in that book. But you also know this. She threw it to you. On purpose. And that might be enough. The hayloft is quiet. Too quiet, really. The kind of quiet that makes you suspicious of how loud your own heartbeat feels. It's just you, a few bales of straw, a pitchfork with a bent tine, and Gisela sitting cross-legged with a bowl of dried apples. She offers you one without speaking. You take it, your fingers brushing hers like the softest little lightning bolt of doom. She's been slipping away to meet you here after chores. Never long, never often, but enough. Enough for you to learn that she hates goats, loves stories about saints, and once slapped a Reeves son with a wet linen sheet for grabbing her arm. You're a little bit in love with that story. Also with her. You talk about the mill, the weather, your families. But lately, the talk has changed. Hints. Hypotheticals. What if we had our own goose kind of stuff. Serious now. Serious enough to make your stomach flutter and your palms itch. You give her something today. A bundle of herbs. Wrapped in rough linen. Chamomile for calm. Rosemary for memory. Thyme because, well, it smells nice and someone told you it's romantic. Quirky tidbit. In medieval folk tradition, thyme was believed to attract fairies and sometimes lovers. Risky combination. You hope she likes the fairy part more than the superstition about dreams and seduction spells. She unwraps it carefully, smiles, then leans close enough that you can count the freckles on her nose. She whispers, "You really know how to charm a girl, don't you?" You don't, but you nod anyway. Mainstream historical fact. Peasant courtship often relied on small gifts. Tokens from the woods, herbs, carvings, even bread. Not just for romance, but for signaling intent in a society with strict norms and lots of nosy neighbors. You ask if her father's still snooping for suitors. She nods, then shrugs. He likes goats more than people. Whoever brings him the best goat wins. You laugh, sort of, but it's a bit too real. She sighs. I wish he'd just listen to me. You want to say I'd fight a dozen goats for you, but instead you say, he's lucky to have a daughter with opinions. She leans back, arms folded behind her head. He says opinions are like holes in a bucket. Everybody has one, and most of them leak. You both laugh quietly because the thatch above creaks with someone walking past. You go still, then slowly relax again as the footsteps fade. Historians still argue whether young peasants had genuine romantic agency or were bound entirely by family, economy, and livestock counts. Some records suggest surprising independence, others rigid control. The truth, as always, probably smelled like wet hay and compromise. You reach over and take her hand. She doesn't pull away. She squeezes once, then says, "If I have to marry someone else, I'll poison his soup." You blink. You can't say that out loud. "I didn't. I whispered it." Still counts. She grins. "Don't worry. I'd use something slow." You lie back in the straw beside her, arms folded over your chest, wondering how much trouble you'd get in for stealing a goose and a girl in the same season. Probably a lot. Definitely worth it. Your boots squelch in the muck as you approach the cooper's hut with a goose in one arm and a knot in your stomach. It's time. You've thought this through at least 12 times and practiced your speech on the dog. The dog seemed unimpressed. But here you are anyway, braving Gisella's father, a man whose love language is barrel construction and suspicious grunting. You nod politely. He looks at the goose, then at you, then at the sky, as if hoping divine intervention will spare him this conversation. "I'd like to speak for your daughter," you say. Not the smoothest opening, but it's what you practiced. I'd like to offer for her hand." He squints. "With that goose?" "Yes, sir. And also with 3 sacks of barley and a promise not to die of laziness." He's silent. So silent you consider whether you've just proposed marriage or declared war. Mainstream historical fact. Among medieval peasants, marriage negotiations often hinged on bride price, dowry, or exchange of goods. You didn't just marry a person, you brokered a survival alliance with their kin. Love was optional. Livestock was not. Finally, he speaks. "What else you got?" You panic. Gut tit. Meh. I'm strong. Most lads say that. "I can read a little?" He pauses. "You can read. A bit. Father Gregory's been teaching us psalms." He mutters something like "show off" and spits into the dirt. "Gisella's a stubborn girl," he warns. "Doesn't sew straight, talks too loud, and scares the chickens." You smile. "That's all fine with me." Quirky tidbit. In certain regions, a potential suitor could be tested by completing tasks for the bride's family, like chopping wood, herding pigs, or surviving a meal with her mother. You just hope your trial doesn't involve latrines. He finally grunts and jerks his head. "Ask her yourself." That's it. That's the test. You find her sitting on the stoop, weaving nettle stem twine into something vaguely useful. She looks up. "He said yes." He said, "Ask her." She blinks. "Oh, a beat." Then, "You're really offering a goose?" You hold it up. The goose honks in betrayal. She bursts out laughing. "Well, I suppose that's romantic." In a very itchy, flappy way. Historians still argue whether peasant women had full consent in marital decisions or whether family pressure prevailed. Evidence suggests that while girls could veto an unwelcome match, most had limited control. But sometimes the heart spoke louder than custom. You sit beside her. She doesn't run. You talk. Plans. Hopes. Where you'd live. Whose bed you could borrow until you had your own. "I want a corner near the window," she says. "There's no window." "Then we'll make one." You grin. "Deal." The goose bites your wrist. Love hurts. The news spreads like spilled milk in a sloped kitchen. You and Gisela are getting married. Well, not yet, but the banns are posted. 3 Sundays publicly announced at Mass, just to give the villagers a chance to object. Or gossip. Mostly gossip. Father Gregory mumbles the first announcement during his homily, somewhere between reminding everyone to fast before Lent and warning them about the dangers of fermented turnips. You catch Gisela's eye from across the nave. She's already blushing. The boy beside her snickers. Her mother fans herself like it's the second coming of summer. After the service, a knot of old women gathers by the well. You walk past and hear the words goose, rash, and better than her cousin's match. You don't want to know the details. You keep walking. Mainstream historical fact: church bans were a formal part of marriage law in medieval Europe. 3 public declarations made to ensure there were no legal or consanguineous obstacles. But they also served as a flashing neon sign for village chatter. You try to act normal for the next 3 weeks, but normal is tricky when everyone's watching you like you're about to walk into a bear trap. The miller's son slaps you on the back so hard you nearly swallow your tongue. The blacksmith offers you a discount on a marriage hammer, whatever that is. Even your grandmother suddenly has opinions about good sheets and how to keep a woman's interest when you don't bathe. And then there's Gisella's aunt. She's taken it upon herself to prepare you both with unsolicited advice involving root vegetables, moon phases, and something about not sweeping in circles. You stop listening halfway through and nod politely. Quirky tidbit: in some regions, gossips would forecast the couple's future based on how many times the banns were heard without objection, or whether animals acted oddly during the announcements. One particularly dramatic duck once halted a marriage entirely. The banns pass without interruption. Miraculously, you and Gisela are still set to marry, despite the duck population's apparent neutrality. Your wedding day is chosen based on availability, moon cycles, and Aunt Berta's vague feeling that Tuesday feels lucky this month. You don't argue. Historians still argue whether peasant weddings were community events or private rituals. Records show both extremes. Some were celebrated with feast days and bonfires, others completed quietly with little more than a muttered vow and a witness. Yours is somewhere in between: a muddy yard, some borrowed bread, and every cousin within braying distance. You find yourself rehearsing your vows while chopping wood, milking a goat, and trying to scrape mud off your only nice tunic. You have never been cleaner or more anxious. Gisela is quiet this week, not distant, just thoughtful. You suspect she's imagining what it will feel like to sleep beside a snorer who sweats in winter. She asks, one evening, "Are you scared?" You shrug. "A little. Not of you. Of messing it up." She leans her head on your shoulder. "Good. So am I." And just like that, the world seems a little less frightening. The banns are over. The rumors are baked. The ceremony's coming. Love is no longer hypothetical. It's next Tuesday. The wedding morning begins not with harps or hymns, but with a goose stepping on your face. It's yours. The same goose from the romantic offering weeks ago. Still alive. Still deeply resentful. Someone thought it would be festive to let it wander about as a kind of living centerpiece. You now regret this entire poultry-based courtship tradition. You roll out of bed, hay poking every inch of you, and stare down at the tunic your mother laid out. It's clean, mostly, stiff with soap that smells like old onions and desperation. But today's not about fashion. It's about showing up, standing straight, and hopefully not falling into the ceremonial wine vat. You walk to the clearing where the wedding will be held, right beside the millstream. Not because it's scenic, but because it's far enough from the pig pens to feel spiritual. Someone's strewn wildflowers on the grass. A borrowed cloth canopy flaps gently overhead. And there's Gisela. She's wearing a saffron yellow smock that somehow makes her look like both a sunrise and a warning flag. Her hair's braided back with little sprigs of lavender. You catch your breath. You've seen her ankle-deep in mud, elbow-deep in barley, and red-faced from laughter, but nothing prepares you for this version of her. Clean, nervous, radiant, like she's been carved out of sunlight and spite. Mainstream historical fact: peasant weddings were often held outdoors, with ceremonies performed by the local priest and followed by communal feasts. Lavishness varied, but most included bread, ale, meat if lucky, and some wildly interpretive dancing. Father Gregory mumbles the vows in Latin first, then in the local tongue. You repeat them with a dry mouth and trembling knees. Gisela does too, though her voice sounds stronger than yours. She squeezes your hand just hard enough to remind you that she's still Gisela under the flowers. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, guests threw grain, not flowers, symbolizing fertility, prosperity, and a subtle threat of dental injury. One boy hurls an entire turnip. You suspect that was not tradition, just mischief. The wedding meal is a table. Well, 2 planks over barrels, loaded with lentils, coarse bread, dried apples, and a roast chicken that looks suspiciously scrawny. But you don't care. You're starving. You're married. And everyone seems to be pretending you're respectable for one full afternoon. Someone starts a lute tune. Someone else starts a rumor. The dancing begins, wild and uneven. You try to keep up. You fail. Gisela drags you into a spin and nearly sends you into a bucket. She's laughing again, loudly, unapologetically. You don't think you've ever been happier. Historians still argue whether peasant weddings were primarily community-binding events or deeply personal unions. The records say both, because joy and duty are not mutually exclusive. Today, for once, they're perfectly aligned. As dusk falls, the guests thin out, and you're left sitting on a rock beside the stream, shoes off, feet in the water, Gisela beside you. "Still think you're ready for this?" she asks. "I think I'm already in it," you reply. "Good," she says, "because my feet hurt, I'm tired, and I'm not getting up until someone brings me cake." "There was cake." "No, but I'd like to imagine." You lean back, watching the stars blink to life. So does she. Beneath the moon, beside the stream, under a borrowed canopy. You're no longer a lone peasant with a goose and a crush. You're married, and for tonight, that's enough. The first night is not what the songs promise. You and Gisela walk back to the cottage. Technically your uncle's, but he's away visiting a widow 3 hamlets over. He left the place swept, aired, and lined with exactly 1 itchy wool blanket and a wooden bowl still full of questionable stew. Romantic. She opens the creaky door. You follow, bumping your head on the lintel for the 3rd time that week. Inside, a straw mattress, a sputtering candle, and an ominously damp patch on the ceiling. Love, sweet love. Mainstream historical fact. Most peasant homes were 1-room cottages with minimal privacy, shared by both people and livestock. A newly married couple might live with extended family until they could afford or inherit their own home. So yes, the cow might be your first housemate. You sit on the bed. It rustles like a mouse convention. She sits beside you and laughs, awkward and bright. "This is ours," she says. "It is," you say. Then silence. Then, "I don't know what to do now." "Me neither." You both nod like that solved something. Eventually, you find yourselves lying side by side, fully clothed, because frankly it's cold and you're not trying to impress anyone with your knees tonight. The candle gutters out. Morning comes not with birdsong, but with the groaning of your back and the unmistakable sound of a neighbor's goat relieving itself just outside the door. Married life. Quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Europe, witnesses would stay near the house on the wedding night to ensure the marriage was consummated. In some cases, they even listened in. Thankfully, in your village, the custom is to leave a jug of ale and mind your business. The first weeks blur. You work the fields, patch the roof, argue over how much flour is too much flour to waste on dumplings. Gisela teaches you how to mend socks with twine. You pretend to enjoy it. She pretends you're good at it. The illusion is generous on both sides. She's practical, blunt, smart in ways that make you feel like your brain is wearing boots 2 sizes too small. You adore her. You also learn that she snores softly, but in patterns that sound like distant drums. Sometimes you beat rhythms on your chest to match. She dreams out loud. Once she punched you in her sleep yelling, "Get your own onion." You respected her more for it. Historians still argue whether romantic love played a consistent role in medieval peasant marriages. Evidence leans toward practicality over passion, but clearly, some couples found affection in the daily absurdity of survival. You fight, of course, about bread, about your mother's passive-aggressive comments, about whether goats can understand tone. But then she'll hand you a hot mug of nettle tea without speaking, or rest her head on your shoulder while you sort barley, or toss you a lopsided smile when you're covered in pig slop and say, "Still the best I've got." And honestly, you feel lucky. Even on days when everything hurts and the wind smells like damp straw and disappointment, you think, "This is mine. This strange, stubborn life. This strange, stubborn woman." This goat probably forever. You share a roof. Not a toothbrush because she drew the line there, but you're sharing a future. And sometimes, in a place where the only luxury is time, that's love enough. You wake up to the sound of rain smacking the thatch like it holds a grudge. Outside, the world is mud, inside, slightly warmer mud with a roof. You grope around for your tunic, still damp from yesterday, and consider pretending to be dead to avoid another day of hauling compost. Gisela is already up. She's stoking the fire, muttering at it like it insulted her mother. You watch her for a moment. Hair tangled, sleeves rolled, one sock missing, and feel something strangely powerful. Contentment, or indigestion. Hard to tell before breakfast. Mainstream historical fact. For medieval peasants, daily life revolved around the seasons. Harvests meant long days and sore backs. Winters meant hunger, cold, and rationed bread. Love had to fit somewhere between chores. You join her at the hearth. She hands you a cup of something hot, bitter, and mysterious. Don't ask, she says. You don't. The days fall into rhythm. Fields, meals, sleep, repeat. Sometimes she joins you planting. Sometimes you help her with spinning. Occasionally, you both chase a chicken into a neighbor's yard and pretend it's not yours. But the rhythm includes arguments. Oh, the arguments. Over how long to soak the lentils. Over whether her cousin Tilda is just dramatic or a public menace. Over whether you've been staring too long at the blacksmith's daughter, who is objectively not prettier, just cleaner. Quirky tidbit. Peasant couples sometimes fought publicly, and some villages had local mediators or peace days where elders helped reconcile quarrels, usually with stern glares and fresh loaves of bread as bribes. You sulk one evening after a particularly heated debate about garlic proportions in stew. She throws a wooden spoon at your head. You duck. She laughs. You don't. Then she kisses your forehead, sighs, and mutters, "Next time, make your own damn stew." Historians still argue whether peasant relationships allowed emotional expression or repressed it under labor and survival. Some argue love was functional. Others see evidence of affection in songs, letters, and the occasional wildly inappropriate woodcut. You start noticing things. How she always leaves half a turnip for you, even when food is low. How she mutters jokes to the sheep. How she hums when she needs dough, slightly off-key but consistent. You do your part, too. You fix the leak above the bed. You carve her a comb. You even apologize for eating the last apple and replace it with a bruised one you pretend is better. One night, she looks at you across the fire and says, "I thought it would feel more like the stories." "Which stories?" you ask. "The ones with towers, and knights, and dragons." You smirk. "You're thinking of nobles. I'm thinking of escape." You nod. "Me too." And you sit there, shoulder to shoulder, staring into flames and silence. It's not a tower. It's not a dragon. But it's real. Maybe that's better. Market day arrives with the fanfare of screeching pigs and a cartwheel falling off mid-turn. You and Gisela trudge toward the village square, sacks in hand, optimism low. It's your one day to trade, gossip, and watch your neighbors haggle over onions like they're diamonds. She wears her best apron, slightly less stained than the rest, and pins a ribbon in her braid, teal against the tangle. You can tell she's trying. You match her effort by washing your face and promising not to talk about manure for at least an hour. Mainstream historical fact. Weekly markets were crucial for peasant economies. Places to sell surplus goods, buy essentials, hear news, and observe a chaotic blend of entertainment, politics, and scandal. They also served as semi-public theaters of courtship and competition. You're there to trade eggs. She's there to browse. You suspect this involves scrutinizing other people's root vegetables with a judgmental squint. That's when he arrives. A traveling performer. Hair like tangled gold thread. Tunic too bright for someone who doesn't own a shovel. He juggles knives, sings a bawdy ballad, and winks at every married woman with alarming precision. Quirky tidbit. Medieval jugglers often traveled between towns, performing for food and lodging. Some doubled as messengers, informants, or mild con artists. Many had questionable dental situations, camouflaged by charisma and shadowy lighting. Gisela laughs at his joke. You feel a cold thud in your chest. Not jealousy exactly, just territorial skepticism. You tighten your grip on the egg basket like it's a weapon. She claps politely. He bows dramatically. His eyes skim the crowd and land briefly on her. Then you. His smirk shifts, subtle but unmistakable. Challenge accepted. Historians still argue whether monogamy was emotionally enforced among peasants or seen more pragmatically. Love, after all, had to contend with high mortality, temptation, and occasionally charming grifters with unusually white teeth. You sulk all the way home. You liked him, you blurt. He was funny, she replies. He had clean boots. No one here has clean boots. She stops, sighs, and says, I liked you. Enough to marry you, even though you're jealous of shoes. That one stings, but it's also fair. Later, after an awkward dinner and prolonged silence, she hands you a slice of bread, still warm. I'm not going anywhere, she says. He doesn't know the difference between a turnip and a rutabaga. You chuckle reluctantly. You do, she adds. You smile. Maybe that's your superpower. Root vegetable literacy and long-term commitment. The night ends with you mending a hole in her sleeve and her humming that off-key tune again. No loot, no applause, no smirk. Just the creak of the bench and the slow mending of pride. In the great romance of manure and memory, you're still her choice. It starts with a cough. Nothing dramatic, just a dry, hacking sound that Gisela brushes off as dust from the loft. You nod, though there's no loft. And definitely no dust, just the kind of air that tastes like damp bark and worry. The next morning, her cheeks are flushed. Not the healthy, rosy kind. The kind that makes your stomach twist. Mainstream historical fact. Illness was a constant in medieval peasant life. With poor sanitation, limited medical knowledge, and cramped living conditions, even a cold could spiral into something dangerous. The most basic infection could turn fatal in days. You wrap her in blankets, boil whatever herbs are left, and mutter prayers that feel rusty on your tongue. She waves you off. It's nothing, she insists. Just tired. You try to believe her. She stops helping with chores, then stops standing, then stops pretending. Quirky tidbit. Medieval folk remedies ranged from the charmingly useless, carrying dried toads in pockets, to the medically horrifying, inhaling the smoke of burned goat dung. You try none of these. You just sit by her side and hold her hand. You fetch the healer, a woman with more wrinkles than words. She examines Gisela with a quiet seriousness, then presses something foul-smelling into your palm. Boil this, she says. 3 times a day. You do. For days, time slips. You lose track of chores, of sunrise, of anything that isn't the rise and fall of her breath. Historians still argue whether love softened hardship or simply sharpened the pain. There are ballads about devotion during sickness, but also records of abandonment and remarriage within weeks of a spouse's death. Survival didn't leave much room for mourning. But you don't think of that. You only think of her voice, how she used to hum while mending. Her fingers, how they smelled of rosemary and ash. Her laughter, which came out sideways, like it wasn't sure it was allowed. She gets worse. You sit beside her, eyes burning, watching her chest like it holds the whole world. The cottage is silent, except for the fire and the occasional wheeze that lets you hope another hour is possible. Then, one night, it happens. She opens her eyes, smiles faintly. You still haven't swept. You laugh through your tears. You're alive. She nods. For now. She squeezes your hand. You spend the next few days in a cautious joy. She's still weak, but her color returns. She asks for broth, then bread, then, miraculously, cheese. The healer returns and shrugs. Stubborn, she says. That helps. You thank her, profusely. Gisela lives, barely, but fully. You sleep beside her that night with both relief and terror, because now you know what it feels like to almost lose her. And it makes every ordinary thing, every sheep, every spoon, every slightly burnt loaf of bread, feel like a miracle. She wakes and mutters, "You better not be staring at me." You kiss her forehead. I am, you whisper. And I will. Spring creeps back into the village like a cat pretending it never left. The air no longer tastes like wet wood, and the first green shoots poke up from the earth with the timid energy of someone unsure if it's safe to be hopeful again. You and Gisela plant onions. She hums, off-key as always, while you dig crooked rows. You're not very good at this. She pretends not to notice. She's still weak but walking again, and you treat her shadow like a sacred relic. Mainstream historical fact: in medieval agrarian life, spring was a season of both physical renewal and emotional restoration. Festivals marked fertility, planting, and the tentative return of life after winter's long grip. Love often bloomed or rekindled during this time of rebirth. You catch her laughing again. Not just a polite chuckle or sarcastic snort, a full laugh. The kind that starts in the stomach and ends in watery eyes. You almost cry just hearing it. You bring her daisies. You find a smooth stone that looks vaguely like a heart and declare it a gift. She calls you ridiculous, but keeps it by the bed anyway. One night, you sit under the stars, both of you wrapped in a shared cloak, and listen to the frogs sing their dreadful ballads. I almost died, she says. I noticed, you reply. I thought about everything I'd miss, mostly bread. And you smile. In that order? Close call. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, peasant couples reaffirmed vows informally during springtime festivals. These handfastings weren't legally binding but symbolized ongoing commitment, and often involved a good deal of cider and inappropriate dancing. You make her a ring, just a loop of straw, but she pretends it's gold. You reenact your wedding in the field, chickens as witnesses, a cow as priest. She insists on kissing you twice for emphasis. Historians still argue whether such displays of affection were rare or simply unrecorded. The written word favored the elite. The love of peasants lived in gesture, not ink. She stitches your name, well, your initial, into the inside hem of her apron. You carve hers into the underside of the doorframe. No one sees it. That's the point. You no longer bicker about stew spices. You argue about more important things, like whether you should get a second goat. You shouldn't. You will. She's still Gisela. Blunt, clever, a little terrifying when she hasn't eaten. But now she's softer around the edges. So are you. One morning, you wake up to sunlight on her face and the unmistakable sound of her humming again. This time in tune. You don't say anything. You just listen. And in that moment, you understand something that scrolls and sermons rarely explain. Love is not the storm. It's the shelter after it. Summer arrives loud and sticky, like a drunk uncle at a wedding. The fields grow thick with wheat and complaints about the heat. You and Gisela move slower now, not from laziness, but from the practical understanding that no one ever died from too little hoeing, but plenty from too much sun. You tie a damp rag around your head. She does the same and claims you look like a bandit who's lost his horse and his dignity. You agree. Mainstream historical fact. Harvest season was the busiest and most critical time of year for peasants. The success or failure of the summer crops determined survival through the winter. Everyone worked. Men, women, children, even the sick if they could stand. You both rise before dawn. By midday, you're drenched. By evening, you're aching. By nightfall, you're asleep mid-chew. Still, there are moments when she wipes sweat from her brow and looks at you like you're not entirely hopeless, when you remember why love, like wheat, must be tended carefully. Quirky tidbit. Peasant couples sometimes flirted or bonded during communal harvests, using songs, teasing, and playful wagers to endure the labor. One Flemish record even mentions a man proposing after watching a woman outreap him 3 days straight. One afternoon, you pause under an oak tree. Gisela joins you with 2 mugs of ale, slightly warm but still magical. You drink in silence, watching the gold-tinged fields ripple like sleepy oceans. This is it, she says. You raise an eyebrow. What is life right now? You, me, that cloud that looks like a farting goose. You squint. It does. She leans her head on your shoulder. I know it's hard, and boring, and hot, but I'm glad we're doing it together. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants found joy in routine or merely endured it. The answer likely varies, just like today. Later that week, there's a village dance. It's dusty and clumsy, and someone always plays the lute slightly off-key. You don't dance. You never do. But she pulls you up, smiling. You try. You step on her twice. She steps on you once, probably on purpose. You laugh until your ribs hurt. By the end of the night, your tunic is stained, your feet are sore, and your heart feels like a small, well-fed bird. You walk home hand in hand, barefoot, shoes in the other hand, the stars ridiculously bright above you. She hums again, always the same tune. You finally ask her what it is. She shrugs. Something my mother used to sing. I only remember half of it. I made up the rest. You nod. It's ours now. And just like that, summer becomes more than sweat and sighs. It becomes memory, stitched together with song and soil and hands that keep finding each other in the dark. Autumn tiptoes in with the smell of damp leaves and apples gone soft. The sun doesn't linger as long now. You notice shadows growing earlier in the day, stretching over the fields like old secrets. You and Gisela take stock of stores of firewood, of aches that didn't used to be there. You say it's the weather. She says it's time. You both avoid finishing the thought. Mainstream historical fact. Autumn was the season of reckoning. Peasants assessed whether their harvests would last the winter. It was also when taxes and rents were often due, meaning any romantic notions had to fit between anxiety and accounting. You barter 2 cabbages and a cracked jug for a wool shawl to keep her warm. She calls it ugly, then wears it every day. In the evenings, you mend tools by firelight while she embroiders a rabbit into the corner of a blanket. She says it looks like a potato. You agree. It does. A noble potato. Quirky tidbit. Medieval embroidery often included hidden symbols, tiny creatures or initials stitched into hems as quiet declarations of identity, love, or luck. Some pieces even included secret messages in simple runes or motifs. You begin to walk slower together. Not because you're tired, but because there's more to see now. The turning trees, the geese flying in ridiculous V's, the final flash of sun on her cheek before it slips behind the hills. One morning, she burns the porridge, blames the fire. You blame the firewood. Really, it's neither. You were both distracted, staring out the window, watching frost kiss the tips of the grass. Historians still argue whether peasant marriages endured from love, necessity, or sheer routine. But routine itself, you're learning, can become its own kind of devotion. You build the first fire of the season together. It smokes. She waves a cloth at it like she's conducting a very bad orchestra. Eventually, it settles. Eventually, so do you. You count the jars on the shelf, the stacked bundles of straw. You count how many times she's coughed lately. You don't say anything. You just stir the soup and kiss the top of her head. Do you ever wish for more? You ask. She looks at you. Like what? You open your mouth, then close it. This is enough, she says. And if it ever isn't, we'll make more. The fire crackles. Outside, the wind picks up, scattering the last yellow leaves across the yard. They don't fall all at once, just one by one, drifting down like tired confessions. She hums again. The same song, always the same. You don't know all the words. You never will. But you hum along anyway. Winter doesn't arrive. It ambushes. You wake one morning to silence. A thick, smothered hush, and open the door to find the world erased in white. Snow clings to the roof like a warning. The path is gone. Even the trees have forgotten their shape. You shut the door slowly. Gisela is still asleep. You let her stay that way for now. Mainstream historical fact. Winter was the deadliest season for medieval peasants. Food was scarce, warmth was hard-earned, and sickness spread quickly in close quarters. Survival depended on preparation and sometimes pure luck. The cottage becomes the whole world. You ration root vegetables. You invent 100 ways to cook cabbage. You learn to be grateful for the blandness of turnips. You wear every piece of clothing you own. At once, Gisela mocks your fashion sense and adds a third pair of socks to her own outfit. The goat resents you for the cold. So do your joints. You chop wood like your life depends on it, because it does. Quirky tidbit. To combat cold, medieval folk sometimes stuffed their clothes with moss or straw. You try it. Gisela laughs so hard she cries. Then she copies you. At night, you huddle together like spoons left in a drawer. You read frost patterns on the window like bad omens. You talk about spring as if it's a myth told by drunk uncles. One evening, she starts a story and forgets the ending halfway through. You both make one up. It's terrible, but it makes you laugh. And laughing in this season feels like rebellion. Historians still argue whether love made winter bearable or unbearable. After all, to love someone is to fear losing them, and winter sharpens that fear like an ice-slick blade. You catch her coughing again. Just once, but it echoes. You fetch hot water. Wrap her in the ugly wool shawl. Spoon broth into her mouth like a promise. I'm fine, she says. You nod. Of course. You feed the fire. You patch the roof. You whisper prayers to saints you never liked. You sew her name into the lining of your coat. Just in case. She sings quieter now, but still the same song. You fall asleep beside her. Half frozen but full of something warm and stubborn and unwritten. Love doesn't leave you. Not in the frost. Not in the dark. Not when the roof groans under snow or the potatoes sprout fuzz. It stays. Not in grand gestures, but in the way you always keep the side of the bed closest to the cold wall. Just so she won't have to. Spring returns slowly, like an apology written in sunlight. The snow pulls back from the fields, inch by reluctant inch. The mud reappears, the kind that sucks at your boots and makes the chickens look offended. But the air smells like new things again. Wet grass, warm bark, the faint tang of sap. You and Gisela stand in the doorway together, blinking at the brightness. She's thinner than last spring. You hold her elbow when you walk, not because she needs it every time, but because she lets you. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, spring symbolized not just agricultural rebirth, but spiritual and emotional renewal. Easter festivals often brought communal joy, and marriages, new or reaffirmed, were common during this time. The first flower she picks is a violet. She tucks it behind your ear with theatrical seriousness. For beauty, she says. I'm flattered. For me. So I don't have to look at your face. You both laugh. The kind of laughter that's hoarse and hollow at the edges, but still real. Still yours. Quirky tidbit. In some rural areas, peasants practiced love divination in spring, rituals involving dew, eggshells, or walking backward while naming potential lovers. You try none of these. You've already named yours. You clean out the cottage. Sweep the soot. Bury the broken things that can't be mended. She plants onions again. You plant hope. Historians still argue whether peasant lives were tragically brief or quietly heroic. Maybe both. Maybe that's the point. You find the carved initials in the doorframe again. Faded now, softened by time and soot. You trace them anyway. They're still there, like she is. She sings less now, but you do it for her. Off-key, too loud, always the wrong verse. She shakes her head and smiles. You're lucky you're cute. I'm not. Exactly. Lucky. You dance with her in the yard, just once, before your knees protest. No loot. No shoes. Just bird call and the wind in the chimney. You love her like you breathe now. Quietly, constantly, without thinking. The firewood pile grows again. The pantry fills. The roof holds. For now. And that's enough. So now, as your eyes grow heavy and the hum of the world softens around you, let yourself sink into the weight of this quiet little story. A story not of kings or castles, but of onion rows and straw-filled shoes, of laughter over burnt porridge, and initials carved where only the two of you would ever see them. The cottage grows still. The hearth glows low. Outside, the frost melts into earth that has always, patiently, waited to bloom again. Love, like spring, returns not in thunder but in small, steady offerings. A ladle of soup, a shared wool blanket, a single violet tucked behind an ear. Maybe you're not a medieval peasant. Maybe you don't spend your days chasing chickens or boiling turnips or praying the roof holds. But maybe, just maybe, you understand what it means to hold someone's hand through the long winter of life. To say nothing when words are too much. To stay, and keep staying. Breathe deeper now. The world, and its noise, will wait for you. Tonight is for remembering that even in the mud and thatch and cracked clay of a life once lived, love bloomed. Soft, stubborn, real. Let it carry you like a lullaby without words. Let it cradle you like firelight behind thick stone walls. And when morning comes, may you wake warm, steady, and a little more in love with the quiet things.